Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
How we doing, analyst? Jason Elder here with another LEA podcast deep dive. Before You Leap, episode 6, the critical thinking series. And with me, as always, is Randy Stickley. Randy, how we doing?
I'm good, Jason. How about you, bud?
I am doing very well. Was your Christmas good?
It was very busy, a lot of smiles, a lot of laughs, but time to come back to reality, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. Now, hey, just real quick, what kind of gift wrapper are you? Are you prim and proper, or are you a messy gift wrapper?
About 5 years ago, I was the sloppiest rapper in the world, but I will tell you, COVID, of all things, made me the prim and proper rapper.
Oh, no, another thing that COVID has changed in our lives.
You bet.
No, I am definitely a messy rapper. I just to watch somebody tear it up in front of me, I just can't spend too much time doing it. So,
I mean, that's fair. I get it.
all right. So before we leap, you should what today?
Before you leap, you should remember the 4 foundational pillars of critical thinking and intelligence. So, in our last discussion, and this was a minute ago, probably back in November-ish timeframe, we talked about the notion of confidence in your analysis. Now, the confidence piece, yes, it does have a significant bearing on all of the points whenever you're exhaustively researching a topic, a subject, a target, or whatever it may be that you're working on that particular period. And the confidence plays into how you state your assessments, probability versus possibility. But it also has a level of being this foundational pillar that we've had, 6 conversations so far, Jason. So I wanted to make sure that we hit on this in one of these kind of earlier episodes because it is important. It's one of these things that we talk about in the book, Rethinking Thought, A Practitioner's Guide to Critical Thinking and Intelligence Analysis. But beyond courage and confidence is why I'm just kind of lump those two together. The other pillars that we typically think about are the notions of intellectual curiosity, open-mindedness, and humility. Now, I'm sure many folks that have been in this field for a minute have understood these topics and have heard them in different facets, probably in some different nomenclature or verbiage. But if you want to boil it down to some of these basic components that we've been doing in these deep dive discussions, those 4 pillars being courage, intellectual curiosity, open-mindedness, humility, are those ones that we truly think about when we get into that scientific method of what makes us tick when we're working through a project and how we get to an assessment. So we hit on courage and confidence during the last discussion. I'm not going to go too heavily into that, but how we postulate those assessments, how do we articulate the confidence level in our assessment, but also how do we navigate the collaborative world of intelligence? How do we navigate office dynamics, small p politics? I know many folks kind of get cringy when they hear that, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. We deal with those dynamics all the time, and that's just the way it is. So how do you confidently navigate all of that? And then, like I said a moment ago, just the baseline analytic assessment. I know there was a point we probably could have gone into some deeper discussion during that last segment on the scale of probabilities and possibilities that Sherman Kent put out there when he was still with the CIA. And that's probably worth a deeper discussion at some point. And there is a bit of a hot button I have with that with regards to framing bias and how that plays into it. But that's probably a teaser for another episode. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, especially with these pillars, is the notion of intellectual curiosity. I said exhaustively research a moment ago, and that's exactly what this means. We are basically intellectual bloodhounds when it comes to topics, maybe crimes, terrorist events, burglaries. I mean, just the whole gambit that why we're employed by agencies and shops. But that stems from the idea that we have to understand the ins and outs of a subject, a target, a scenario, situation, or whatever it may be. And this is where we get into asking these probing questions. And we know those questions, your who's, your what's, your where's, your when's. But then ultimately, and I say it every time, it comes down to why. I say it whenever I talk at conferences, when I have discussions with classes of analysts that I may be instructing, we get into this notion that every analyst or intelligence professional has to be a petulant child. Jason, you have kids. They were little at one point, correct?
Yes, they were.
Yeah. What was that? What was the thing they always asked you if you said, "Hey, don't drop that toaster in the bathtub"?
Why?
Why? I mean, something that we as adults are like, hey, don't do that. They always ask why. Well, that's us.
Yeah.
And you're an analyst. I'm by trade an analyst. So we always ask why. And that's great because we start to really get into the meat of whatever subject we're dealing with. But that opens the door to the third pillar, which is this concept of open-mindedness. So after we've exhaustively researched and know the ins and outs, the who's the who and the zoo, so to speak, of whatever this topic is, now we're going to get into, okay, am I going too far afield? You need to have a little spatial awareness when it comes to a topic because you may not necessarily be the expert just yet, which is fine. Again, that comes into a point that we're going to touch on here in a moment, but we need to approach that situation or scenario with the understanding that we may have limited knowledge. We may have exhaustively researched it from our perspectives, but there may be something else that we're not quite getting to yet. Maybe it's lack of understanding, limited scope. We talked about the analytic codex several occasions on this segment, but we get into those concepts, and this is where biases can start to grow if we're really thinking about this from a foundational kind of intelligence concept. So if you approach a subject or a topic with this preconceived notion that something is going to occur or is occurring because of this, congratulations, you've stepped into an analytic trap of your confirmation bias growing. And again, that's just one example. Like there's many that you can go into here. And a lot of that stems from, like I said, needing to act fast, not enough information, not enough meaning, limited scope, misinformation plays a role here, but then also this notion of premature closure. And all of this just to say that by the end of it, it can deal with the notion of incorrectness, failure, if you will, a shortcoming in our analytic process. And that leads us into that fourth pillar, humility. I don't know many folks who think they are just the absolute rock star when they're fresh out of their analytic learning, but you have those folks. You have folks who think that they are the best thing in the analytic profession since Dick Hewer, and that's totally fine. They can think that. But it's important to understand that it's impossible to know every single thing 100% of the time with 100% accuracy. That is an analytic pipe dream that I don't care who you are, I don't care what your cognitive process is, and I'm not doing this to be Johnny Raincloud. It's just the truth. That is just a basic logical and cognitive fact. And in fact, it was Sherman Kent. I always go back to Kent because I really gravitate toward his views on the ethics of intelligence work and what it means for us to have these ethics as professionals. But he had 2 points that really should have been lumped into one when it comes to the ethics. But it really calls into what we should think about when we talk about having this sense of humility in our critical thinking. Excuse me. One of those points being this candid admission of shortcomings. When we get into an intelligence project, we get into an assessment, it's okay to say, I don't know. One of the worst things you can do as a professional, if you're in a briefing, and I've seen this happen, I've seen this happen at briefings at what is now known as the open source enterprise. I've seen this when I've gone into briefings in the Pentagon, that somebody who didn't necessarily have all the knowledge on something, rather than using the, we don't have that information right now, we'll get back to you, they just tried to spin a yarn to get out of it, which, Jason, I don't know if you know how that, if you've had that happen, but it's a little cringy to watch happen, especially when it's somebody from your team. But that also goes into this point that you have a willingness to admit failure. That's okay to say you're wrong. It's okay to say that you missed this point. They would almost rather you have this discussion and have that admission before you start kind of trudging ahead with your head down saying, my assessment is 100% correct. We're going to trudge along with it. That's not necessarily what you're there to do. You're there to provide those actionable insights, give them the why, the so what, if you will. And if we try to trudge along with that sense of bullheadedness, you're cheating the process and you're ultimately going to contribute somewhere down the line a failure, whether it's something catastrophic or something that could be more administrative. We're not there to enhance those kind of failings. We're there to help mitigate those. So those are your 4 pillars. And I'm sure, Jason, me kind of drolling on about these things, you're probably thinking, okay, you're telling me these, but why are they important? Am I kind of getting into the ballpark there?
Yeah. So you're using the word pillars there. And to me, I envision 4 independent parts, but I'm guessing that each one of them is connected to one another and influences each other.
You know what? You hit on a really interesting point because anytime that I've read and had to go through any of the books that we went into, not only for my study, but also when we were putting together the content for the book, Rethinking Thought,
Mhm.
You see it conceptualized as just four pillars holding up the notion of critical thinking. But I agree with you, Jason. There is more of this kind of phalanx. One feeds into the other, supporting the other, buttressing the other, kind of this chain effect, if you will.
Mhm.
So you nailed it. I mean, with courage, you have this understanding that you're going to answer this question, you're going to answer it as effectively as you can, and you know where you're going to get those sources. So, yeah, that bleeds into this notion of intellectual curiosity. You're going to exhaustively find all the sources that you can to answer that key intelligence question or that requirement, get to that so what or that why. But as you're going through that, you need to understand that you're not the all knowing, you're not omnipotent or omniscient. You have a failing somewhere that you could be cooking up a scenario or a topic or a notion that may not even be existed or founded. So you need to understand that there is this idea that you could be wrong, you could fail. And this is where you see all of those pillars kind of working in this one on top of the other kind of shield pattern that helps you bolster this overall kind of concept of critical thinking that serves as a bedrock to all intelligence efforts that I work in, you work in, and I think just about every listener works in.
So the interesting one to me is the humility out
Okay.
of the four. And because it seems to me that the other three, if you asked me which of the four doesn't seem like the other, that
Mhm.
it would be humility. And it does seem like those first three there are connected. It's something that I've seen in one way or another in speeches and training with intelligence. I'm not sure how much I've actually seen and read regarding humility.
And I always think about it this way. You could be 100% certain that the earth is flat.
Mm-hmm.
You could sit there in your croft in Florida. I could sit here in my little hole in Virginia and say the earth is 100% flat. And I'll keep my head down and I will ignore every piece of scientific knowledge or any kind of extra insight. And in my own reality, that's correct. That's 100% true.
Mm-hmm.
But the second I try to give some type of assessment to another, a person who may be wanting to travel to Samoa or want to go to Fiji, with my head down, I'm going to tell them they're just flying off into space because there is nothing on that side because there is no circular nation or roundness to the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But that tenacity will be all fine and well as supporting your own kind of reality. But having outright stubbornness, it cuts short your entire theory. And I always tell folks this, and I used to tell folks this when I was instructing on intelligence. Being tenacious, there's nothing wrong with it. Being a targeted, tenacious intelligence professional and being able to scout out your data and scout out all the information that you're going to use to mold into whatever intelligence assessment you're trying to postulate, that's great. That is a bedrock competency and investigative method. But it's when you start ignoring maybe some of those collaborative efforts that we see in, our courage phase, or we start ignoring some of the signposts and indicators that, hey, we might be walking into a cognitive trap or have a thoughtful failing that we may start to identify in open-mindedness. Or maybe we're just seeing outright incorrect data while we're scouting out bits and pieces of data. It's okay to have that targeted sense that I'm right, but at the end of the day, if the data is not telling you your theory is correct, you have to change the theory.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fallacy where folks will tend to, and I'm not saying analysts, I'm not trying to assign blame, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But you have many folks that walk in with a predetermined theory and they try to make those facts suit that theory.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. That's great, grand, and wonderful. You're not doing the process correctly. Then that humility aspect's actually going to help you kind of learn from your mistakes, make sure you don't repeat any of these lapses, and you'll come back as a stronger, more effective professional to the entire field as the process continues. Again, not everyone's a rock star right out the gate.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get dinged, you're going to get bruises, and that's totally fine. But to just sit there and kind of pout and say it's your way or the highway, well, there's a lot of folks in this field that may have a better idea and may have maybe more better suited to be a member of that team and in terms of its efficiency and its ability to have those actionable outputs. So I can see where it may be the outlier and maybe kind of the odd man out. But if you think about it from your phalanx example, it totally fits in because it's taken into account the three other pillars and then understanding, okay, I may be wrong. I may have had a lapse in judgment here, but it doesn't mean I'm going to take it to heart and shut down. You take it to heart, you learn from it, and then you improve.
Mhm.
So I definitely see it as kind of a worthy successor to those other three, as opposed to just being this staunch outlier.
Yeah. It reminds me too that I can't remember if he was a sergeant or a lieutenant, and it doesn't really matter at Cincinnati Police Department. He actually would never apologize. Like that was his policy. Whether his team did something wrong, he would never admit guilt. He would never apologize. And he would change the way they did business, but he would never admit that they did something wrong. And we got into like a lunch bunch conversation about it the one day. Because I feel on the analyst side, I feel the analysts have a tendency to be more timid and to be more apologetic.
Yeah.
And so for me, the humility thing, I see it a little bit as analysts being maybe have too much humility, and that we had talked about in previous episodes that I think analysts, and I think I did this as well, is like they don't go into conclusions and summaries. They just deliver the facts and then don't draw conclusions, because if they don't draw conclusions, then they're not picking a side. They're just displaying facts and they're letting the audience make that conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're kind of running short on time here, but
Mm-hmm.
you definitely see that. And I try to give everyone a fair shake in the profession, because the term intelligence professional applies to this wide spectrum. You have officers, you have investigators, you have agents that have that intelligence nexus and are part of this process. I mean, just look at, Dr. Clark's target-centric approach. It all serves the purpose of getting better knowledge and understanding. But you're right, there does tend to be this schism between the analytic shop being the ones that bear the brunt of kind of the intellectual, like, oh, I'm sorry, of the matter, whereas some of the folks that may be from the badge and gun perspective, I don't know if they want to shirk it off. I don't know if they want to play the blame game. I'm not sure, but I've seen more instances of that than the contrary. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
have worked with some rock star federal agents here recently that are fantastic, and they're collaborators, and they understand, look, we're part of a team and my failing is yours and vice versa. How can we work collaboratively to get this question answered? And that's where that humility, and I love to see it shine, because that just shows me I can't completely be jaded when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to these dynamics as the profession progresses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you mentioned, we are running a little bit short on time. So for the analysts, before they leap, they should what?
Before they leap, they should certainly remember those four foundational pillars of critical thinking, being courage or confidence, intellectual curiosity, maintaining open-mindedness, and have a smidge of humility. It's going to serve you in the long run, especially as you get into those more collaborative projects.
Yeah. And I think for anybody, you hear those four pillars and you probably instantly evaluate your strengths and weaknesses. Where you would be most comfortable, where do you see the most room for improvement for yourself?
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, very good. And I guess real quick, before we get you out of there, I know we're big comic book movie fans. So, did you see the Superman trailer?
I did. I'm cautiously optimistic.
I tell you what, it did its job for me because I wasn't excited at all for that movie prior to seeing that trailer, and now my expectation has like really gone through the roof. So it did its job in terms of hooking me into the movie. So I am looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. But they did Nathan Fillion dirty with the guy going.
All right, very good, Randy. Thank you so much for your time. Until next time, think before you leap.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.